Have you ever felt the sting of betrayal from the very people you're supposed to trust the most? Imagine standing at your husband's grave, your heart shattered into a million pieces, only to discover that your own children are not there to comfort you, but to circle like vultures. For 72-year-old Elizabeth, this nightmare became her reality. This is a story about how a woman, stripped of her home, her dignity, and her past, found an unexpected weapon and forged a path to a victory so devastating it would tear her family apart forever. Stick with us through this unbelievable journey of grief, greed, and glorious revenge. Make sure to follow, like, and share this video, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single shocking chapter of Elizabeth's fight for justice. The air in Maple Creek Cemetery was thick and damp, heavy with the scent of freshly turned earth and the cloying sweetness of too many lilies. It clung to Elizabeth's black wool coat, a cold, wet weight on her shoulders. She stood, a statue of silent grief, her gaze fixed on the mound of dark soil that had swallowed the polished mahogany casket, and with it, 60 years of her life. The grey Oregon sky wept a fine, persistent mist, blurring the edges of the ancient oaks that stood sentinel over the dead. Each droplet felt like a personal affront, a cold little tap of reality against her cheek. Her daughter, Chloe, was attached to her arm, a surprisingly strong anchor of performative sorrow. At 45, Chloe had perfected the art of public emotion. Her face, framed by a chic, asymmetrical black hat, was a mask of elegant tragedy. Her sobs, which punctuated the quiet murmurings of the other mourners, were just a little too rhythmic, a little too perfectly timed. Out of the corner of her eye, Elizabeth could see one of Chloe's friends, a young woman with purple hair and a phone held discreetly at waist level, capturing the moment for Chloe's 3 million Instagram followers. The caption was probably already written. "Heartbroken but holding on. My mother, my rock, in our darkest hour. Hashtag grief journey. Hashtag family first. Hashtag rest in peace, Papa." "Oh, Mom," Chloe whispered, her voice a practiced, breathy catch. "He's really gone. What are we going to do without him?" Elizabeth didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat was a knot of unspoken words, of memories and questions that had no place in this staged production. What were they going to do? The question was absurd. Richard had been her husband, her partner, the other half of her soul. For Chloe, and for her husband David, Richard had become little more than a financial inconvenience and a source of tiresome anecdotes in his final years. David, a man who seemed permanently braced for a blow, placed his hand on Elizabeth's other shoulder. His touch wasn't comforting. It was proprietary. It was the hand of a man staking a claim. 48 years old, and he still carried the aura of a high school vice principal who was deeply disappointed in your life choices.
"He's at peace now, Elizabeth,"
David murmured, his voice a low rumble of false sincerity.
"No more pain. We have to be strong for each other."
His fingers tightened, a subtle pressure that sent a chill down her spine.
Strong for each other, he meant strong for them. Elizabeth's world had shrunk to this small, suffocating circle of feigned sympathy. She felt a profound and dizzying disconnect, as if she were watching a movie of her own life from a great distance. Her body was here, enduring the damp cold and the heavy hands, but her mind was elsewhere.
Her gaze drifted past the spectacle of her daughter's grief and landed on her grandson. Leo stood a few feet away, separate from the main group. At 17, he was a gangly collection of sharp angles and teenage awkwardness, swallowed by a dark suit that was a size too big. He wasn't performing. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed and raw, fixed on the raw earth of the grave. He wasn't looking at the cameras or the crowd. He was looking at the place where his grandfather now lay. He was the only one who seemed to understand the crushing finality of it all. He caught Elizabeth's eye for a fleeting moment, and in his gaze she saw a reflection of her own desolation, mixed with a furious, helpless disgust for his parents' theatre. It was a tiny spark of connection in a universe of cold, empty space. David's hand squeezed her shoulder again, a little more insistently this time. "Let's get you home, Mum. You must be exhausted." The word home was a key, unlocking a memory that flooded her with a sudden, sharp anxiety. It wasn't a gentle, nostalgic recollection. It was a warning. The scene shifted in her mind. It was just a week ago, but it felt like a lifetime. The sterile, beige room of the hospital. The incessant, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Richard lay against the propped-up pillows, his skin the colour of old parchment, his breath a shallow, rattling thing. The robust, vibrant man, who had built their life with his bare hands, had been whittled down to this fragile, frightened shell. He had motioned for her to come closer, his eyes wide with an urgency that terrified her. "Liz," he'd rasped, his voice a dry whisper. He grabbed her hand, his grip surprisingly strong, almost desperate. "Listen to me. Don't let them." "Don't let them what, Richard? The doctors? What are they saying?" He shook his head, a small, frustrated motion. "No, not them. Chloe, David." He had to pause, gathering a breath that seemed to cost him everything. "Whatever happens, whatever they say to you, the house is yours. It's always been yours. Don't let them ever tell you otherwise." His eyes, sunken and clouded with pain, were suddenly sharp, lucid. He was looking right through her, into a future she couldn't see. "It's your fortress, Liz. Your fortress. Promise me." "Richard, don't talk like that. You're going to come home. We'll sit on the porch." "Promise me," he insisted, his voice cracking. The fear in his eyes wasn't just of dying, it was a specific, pointed fear. For her. "Don't let them take it from you." "I promise," she had whispered, stroking his thin, dry hair, trying to soothe a terror she didn't understand. "Of course, I promise. It's our home." Now, standing by his grave with David's claiming hand on her shoulder and Chloe's calculated sobs in her ear, the memory was no longer unsettling. It was a klaxon, a screaming alarm in the silent cavern of her grief. Richard hadn't been rambling. He had been warning her. The scent of funeral lilies still hung in the air the next morning, a sweet, funereal perfume that permeated every room of the house. Elizabeth sat at the large oak kitchen table, a place of 1,000 family breakfasts, arguments and celebrations, nursing a mug of tea she hadn't touched. The silence in the house was a physical presence. For 60 years it had been filled with noise, the sound of Richard's workshop, the laughter of children, the drone of the television. Now the silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of her own heart. The swinging door from the dining room pushed open and Chloe and David entered. The transformation was startling. The funereal black was gone, replaced by what Chloe called smart casual. She wore tailored slacks and a silk blouse, her face meticulously made up. The mask of the grieving daughter had been packed away. In its place was the face of grim professionalism. David followed, clutching a leather portfolio like a shield. He didn't look at Elizabeth, his eyes scanning the room as if he were assessing it for market value. "Mum, we need to talk," Chloe began, her voice devoid of the breathy emotion from the day before. It was crisp, efficient, She slid into the chair opposite Elizabeth and placed a glossy, tri-fold brochure on the table between them. The brochure's cover was a sun-drenched photograph of smiling, silver-haired seniors playing lawn bowls. In cheerful looping script it read, "Silver Pines Senior Living. Your golden years in bloom." Elizabeth stared at it. The vibrant colours, the beaming faces. It was an alien artifact from another dimension, dropped onto the sacred ground of her grief. David cleared his throat, pulling out the chair next to Chloe. "Elizabeth," he said, and the use of her first name was a small, sharp shock. "We've been doing a lot of thinking about the future, your future. This house," Chloe picked up, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the oak table. It's a lot for one person. The upkeep, the taxes, the stairs. We worry about you being here all alone."
Freetris, Satyrium.
The words were wrapped in the language of concern, but they landed like stones. Elizabeth felt a cold dread begin to creep up from the pit of her stomach. She looked from her daughter's earnest, unblinking face to her son-in-law's shifty gaze. "We've found a wonderful place for you," Chloe continued, pushing the brochure closer. "It's the best in the state. They have a heated pool, art classes, 24-hour nursing care. It's perfect." David opened his portfolio. "We've already spoken to the administrators. They have a suite opening up at the end of the month. We went ahead and put a deposit down to hold it for you. It's a lovely corner unit with a view of the rose garden." A deposit. They had put down a deposit. The words didn't compute. They were talking about her life as if it were a piece of inconvenient luggage they needed to check. The tea in her mug was stone cold, but a burning heat was rising in her chest. "A deposit," she finally managed, her voice thin, reedy.
"You put down a deposit without talking to me?"
"We didn't want to burden you with the details, Mum. Not right now," Chloe said smoothly. "We're just trying to take care of everything, to make this transition as smooth as possible." "Transition?" Elizabeth repeated, the word tasting like poison. "What transition? My home is here. Richard and I built this house." David sighed, a put-upon sound of a man dealing with a difficult child. "And it was a wonderful home, Elizabeth, but things have changed. The mortgage isn't paid off, the property taxes are astronomical, the place needs a new roof. Financially, it's a drain. It's just not practical to keep it. So we're going to sell it," Chloe announced, the statement delivered with the gentle finality of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "The market in Maple Creek is incredible right now. We can sell the house, pay off the debts, and the rest will go into a fund to pay for Silver Pines and all your future expenses. It will secure your future. You'll never have to worry about money again."
They weren't asking, they were informing. The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. This was it. This was the thing Richard had feared. The fortress was being breached, not by an invading army, but by her own flesh and blood.
"No,"
she said, the word a raw tear in the fabric of the conversation.
"No, you can't."
Chloe's expression tightened, the mask of gentle concern slipping to reveal the impatience beneath.
"Mom, be reasonable." "Richard made me promise,"
Elizabeth said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength from the memory of his desperate eyes.
"He told me this house was mine. He told me not to let you take it."
David scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Elizabeth, he was on a dozen different medications. He was confused. He wasn't in his right mind. We all heard him rambling about things that made no sense."
"He was perfectly clear,"
she insisted,
her hands gripping the edge of the table. The old oak felt solid, real. Something to hold on to in a world that was tilting on its axis. "It doesn't matter what he said," David said, his voice turning cold, hard. He leaned forward, his eyes finally meeting hers. They were flat, devoid of sympathy. "We are your legal next of kin. We are the executors of the estate. We'll handle everything." He paused, letting the weight of his next words land. "And frankly, we have to. Richard signed over power of attorney to me a few months ago, when he realized he couldn't manage his own affairs anymore." Power of attorney. The phrase hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A document, a piece of paper, that apparently negated 60 years of love and partnership. A piece of paper she had never seen, never heard of. A piece of paper that Richard, the most meticulous and distrustful man she knew when it came to legal matters, would never have signed without discussing it with her, endlessly.
I don't remember that," she stammered, her mind racing, trying to find a memory, a conversation, anything. There was nothing. "Well, it happened," David said with chilling finality, snapping his portfolio shut. The sound echoed in the silent kitchen like a gavel. "It's all legal and binding. We're just doing what's best. The movers will be here in 2 weeks." Chloe stood up, smoothing down her slacks. She came around the table and placed a hand on Elizabeth's shoulder, the same shoulder David had claimed at the funeral. Her touch was light, dismissive. "It's for the best, Mum," she said, her voice once again dripping with syrupy care. "You'll see. You'll make new friends. You'll be happy." Then they were gone, leaving the Silver Pines brochure sitting in the middle of the table, a garish tombstone for the life she had known. Elizabeth sat there for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in on her, the weight of their betrayal heavier than any grief. The 14 days that followed were a blur of hollowed-out rooms and the scrape of packing tape. Each day, Chloe would arrive for a few hours, a whirlwind of brisk efficiency, sorting 60 years of a shared life into 3 piles: keep, donate, trash. The keep pile was distressingly small, mostly consisting of Elizabeth's clothes and a few photo albums. Chloe deemed aesthetically pleasing enough for her own home. The donate and trash piles grew into mountains. Elizabeth moved through the house like a ghost, her protests dying in her throat before they could be spoken. She felt utterly powerless, a pawn in a game whose rules had been written without her. She'd watch as Chloe carelessly tossed Richard's old vinyl collection into a trash bag, or when David directed a day labourer to haul away the worn leather armchair Richard had spent every evening in for 40 years. Each discarded object was a fresh wound. Leo had tried to help one afternoon, carefully wrapping his grandmother's porcelain teacups in newspaper. Chloe had snatched the box from him. "Don't bother, Leo. She won't have room for this junk where she's going. Go do your homework." The look he'd shopped his mother was pure venom, but he'd retreated, leaving Elizabeth even more alone. On the final day, the house was an echoing shell. A large moving van was parked in the driveway, its ramp lowered like a hungry mouth. Elizabeth was in her bedroom, numbly folding a few last sweaters into a small cardboard box, the single box she was allowed to take with her besides a suitcase. Her entire life reduced to a single box. It felt like a joke in the worst possible taste. The phone, on her bedside table, one of the few items not yet packed, buzzed. She stared at it, the caller ID showing an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but some impulse made her pick it up. "Hello." Her voice was a croak. "Good morning. Am I speaking with Elizabeth Miller?" The voice on the other end was bright, cheerful, and utterly out of place in her grey world. "Yes, this is she." "Wonderful. My name is Janice, and I'm calling from the Oregon State Lottery Commission. I have some fantastic news for you, Mrs. Miller. Are you sitting down?" Elizabeth sank onto the edge of the stripped mattress. A scam, she thought, just what I need. "Mrs. Miller, do you recall purchasing a Powerball ticket at the end of last month at the Plaid Pantry on 3rd Street? She did, vaguely. After a particularly difficult hospital visit, she'd stopped for milk. The jackpot was enormous, and on a whim, a tiny act of defiance against the bleakness of her life, she'd bought a single ticket. She'd used Richard's old numbers, a combination of their birthdays and their anniversary. It played them. "I am very pleased to inform you that your ticket matched 5 of the winning numbers, plus the Powerball. You have won the second-place prize in the drawing." Elizabeth felt a strange, light-headed sensation. "Oh, that's nice. What is that? A few $1,000s?" There was a soft chuckle on the other end of the line. "It's a little more than that, Mrs. Miller. After federal and state taxes are withheld, your lump sum payout will be $54 million. The number didn't register. It was too large, too abstract. $54 million. It was a sound, not a concept. "I'm sorry," Elizabeth said, her mouth dry. "I think I misheard you." $54 million, Mrs. Miller," Janice repeated, her voice patient. "Congratulations. We will be sending an official confirmation letter via certified mail, which should arrive today or tomorrow, along with the preliminary claim forms." A wave of something that was not joy, but a terrifying, hysterical vertigo washed over her. She felt a wild laugh bubbling up in her chest, a laugh that bordered on a scream. $54 million, it was a weapon, it was a shield, it was a secret, a precious, terrifying secret. "Thank you," she whispered and hung up the phone. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely set it back in its cradle. She stared at the empty walls, at the single pathetic box on the floor. The world had just tilted on its axis again, but this time in a direction she never could have imagined. An hour later, Chloe's car pulled into the driveway, followed by David's. They came in without knocking. "Mum, are you ready?" Chloe called out, her voice sharp with impatience. "The movers are on the clock. We need to get you over to Silver Pines for intake." Elizabeth stood up, clutching her purse to her chest. The secret felt like a living thing inside her, a hummingbird of immense power. She picked up her single box of belongings. They bustled her out of the house, their hands on her back, guiding her, pushing her. They didn't let her take one last look. They were too busy, Chloe directing the last of the movers with cold, detached efficiency, David locking the front door with a grimly satisfied click. Elizabeth stood on the sidewalk, a refugee on the curb of her own life. She watched as her daughter, a woman she had raised and loved, pointed at Richard's favourite rose bushes. "Rip those out," she told one of the men. "They'll just get in the way of the open house photos." It was at that moment, her ultimate moment of humiliation and despair, but the mail carrier's truck pulled up. A cheerful woman in a blue uniform hopped out, a small stack of letters in her hand. "Elizabeth Miller?" the mail carrier asked, smiling. "Yes," Elizabeth said. "Got a certified letter for you. Need a signature right here." She handed Elizabeth a clipboard and a pen. As Elizabeth shakily signed her name, David strode over, his face a mask of irritation. "What's this now?" he grumbled. The mail carrier handed the stiff, official-looking envelope to Elizabeth. Before she could even take a proper hold of it, David snatched it from her grasp. "I'll take that," he said. He glanced at the return address. State of Oregon Treasury Department. Great. More debt from Dad, I bet. Probably some unpaid back taxes. This is exactly what I'm talking about. The financial mess he left us to clean up. He didn't wait for a reply. He tore the envelope open with a vicious rip, his contempt for his deceased father-in-law palpable. He pulled out the single sheet of heavy bond paper and unfolded it. Elizabeth watched his face. She watched as the smug irritation dissolved, as if washed away by a sudden, invisible tide. The colour drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, greyish pallor. His eyes, which had been narrowed in annoyance, went wide, then wider still, until they looked like they might bulge from their sockets. His mouth fell open. He looked from the paper to Elizabeth, then back to the paper, as if he could not reconcile the two. Chloe, noticing his sudden paralysis, walked over. "What is it? Another bill?" she asked, peering over his shoulder. Elizabeth saw the exact moment her daughter's brain processed the words on the page. Chloe's jaw didn't just drop, it went slack, her entire face seeming to melt in disbelief. For a full 10 seconds there was absolute pure silence on the suburban street. The only sound was the distant hum of a lawn-mower and the chirping of a sparrow on a telephone wire. The movers paused, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Then slowly Chloe lifted her head. The shock in her eyes was being consumed by a new emotion, something hot and hungry and terrifying. Her face twisted, the corners of her lips pulling back from her teeth, not in a smile, but in a grimace of raw, predatory glee. The mask was gone. This was the real Chloe. She turned to Elizabeth, her eyes glittering with a billion tiny dollar signs. Her voice, when she spoke, was a low, seductive purr, a complete sickening inversion of the tone she had used just moments before. "Mom," she said, taking a step closer, her hand reaching out not to push, but to caress. "We need to talk." The flimsy piece of official letterhead felt like a shield in her hand. It was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to mist and knives. The walk back to the front door of her own home was the longest of her life, each step a declaration. She would not be evicted. Not now, not ever. She saw them through the glass panel of the door, Chloe pacing, David standing with his arms crossed, a vulture waiting for the inevitable. The door opened before her hand touched the knob. "Mum, what are you doing back here?" Chloe's voice was a practiced symphony of concern, the kind she used for her sponsored posts about anxiety supplements. "We thought you were on your way to see Silver Pines. They have a lovely orientation program." Elizabeth pushed past her, into the hall that smelled of her life, of Richard's pipe tobacco and the lemon polish she'd used for 50 years. "I am not going to Silver Pines, Chloe. I am staying here." David stepped forward, blocking her path to the living room. "Now, Elizabeth, we've been over this. It's for your own good. The house is too much for you." He gestured around vaguely, as if the walls themselves were a burden. "No," Elizabeth said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "You have been over this. I have not agreed to anything." She held up the lottery letter. "And things have changed." Chloe's eyes, so adept at finding the camera lens, now narrowed on the paper in her mother's hand. What is that? Another bill? See, Mom, this is what we're talking about. You can't handle the stress. She reached for it, her manicured fingers like talons. Elizabeth snatched her hand back, clutching the letter to her chest. A new fire, born of shock and adrenaline, was kindling in her veins. It felt foreign, hot, and utterly welcome. "It is not a bill," Elizabeth stated, looking from her daughter's feigned worry to her son-in-law's impatient glare. "Then what is it?" David demanded, his voice losing its patient facade. "Let me see it. You're probably confused, Elizabeth. You misread it." "I am not confused." The words ripped out of her, louder than she intended. "I am the owner of this house, and I am the winner of $54 million. And you," she said, her gaze locking onto David, "are going to get out of my way." For a breathtaking second, there was silence. Chloe's jaw went slack, the influencer mask falling away to reveal raw, stupefied greed. David blinked, processing. Then a slow, condescending smile spread across his face. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. $54 million? Oh, Mum. Chloe's voice was syrupy with pity. "You really are getting confused. Did you see something on TV? Sometimes seniors—" "It's real," Elizabeth insisted, her voice trembling slightly. The fire was met with the dousing of their disbelief. "The letter, it's all here." "Let me see the letter," David said, his tone now that of a parent dealing with a child's fantasy. He took a step forward, his hand outstretched. "We need to sort this out. Clearly you're not well." "No!" Elizabeth backed away, bumping into the hall table. A framed photo of her and Richard on their wedding day wobbled. "You can't have it!" "Mom, stop this!" Chloe shrieked, her voice suddenly sharp, cracking with frustration. "You can't manage that kind of money. You'll be scammed in a day. People will take advantage of you. We're trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Elizabeth laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You're the scammers. You're the ones taking advantage." David's face hardened into a mask of cold resolve. He pulled his phone from his pocket. "That's it." With this hysteria, he started tapping on the screen. "Who are you calling?" Elizabeth asked, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. "The police," David said calmly, putting the phone to his ear. "Hello, I need to report a disturbance. My mother-in-law, she's having a significant mental health episode. She's elderly and very confused. Yes, at 24 Harbourview Lane. She's becoming agitated. We're worried she might hurt herself." Chloe nodded vigorously, her eyes wide, performing for an imaginary audience. "He's right, Mom. You need help. We're getting you help." The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. He wasn't just dismissing her, he was weaponizing her age, painting her as a madwoman. The 20 minutes it took for the patrol car to arrive were an eternity of silent warfare. Elizabeth stood by the front door, clutching her letter, while Chloe and David watched her from the living room archway, whispering to each other like conspirators. Two officers, a man and a woman who both looked younger than Leo, stepped into the hall. Their expressions were professional, neutral, but their eyes were wary. "Ma'am, Mr. Harland?" the male officer asked, his gaze sweeping the scene. David stepped forward, all smooth concern. "Thank you for coming, officer. It's my mother-in-law, Elizabeth. She's been having some delusions since her husband passed. Today it's particularly bad. She thinks she won the lottery." He sighed. A masterful performance of a burdened son-in-law. We have an eviction notice, and we're trying to move her to a care facility for her own safety, but she's refusing to cooperate. He handed the officer a sheaf of papers. Elizabeth saw the bold-faced eviction notice and another document she didn't recognize. The female officer turned to her. "Ma'am, is that true?" "He's lying," Elizabeth said, her voice shaking with rage. "This is my house. He has no right."
And I did win. I have the letter. She held it out, a desperate offering. The officer took it, glanced at it, and then at the other papers David had provided. He saw the power of attorney. A forgery, she knew it was, but it looked official. The officer's face was a mask of practiced empathy and legal limitation. "Mr. Harland appears to have power of attorney, ma'am," he said gently. "And this eviction notice seems to be in order. Legally, he is acting as your representative. We can't intervene in that." "But it's a lie! He forged it." "That may be, ma'am," the female officer added, her tone soft, "but that's a civil matter. You'd need to take it up in court with a lawyer. As far as we're concerned, there's no criminal act happening here. We can't force him to leave or you to stay. Our job is just to keep the peace." The humiliation was a physical wave, hot and sickening. To be dismissed as a confused old woman in her own home by officers who were duty-bound to uphold the very laws David was twisting against her. She was rendered powerless, invisible. David's smile was triumphant, barely concealed. "Thank you, officers," he said. "We'll handle it from here. We just want what's best for her." They nodded, gave Elizabeth one last look of pity, and left. The click of the front door closing was the sound of a cell door locking. "Now," David said, turning to her, "are you going to go quietly, or do we have to make this more unpleasant than it already is?" She looked at their faces, Chloe's impatient, David's smug, and knew she couldn't win this battle. Not today, not here. Defeated, she turned without a word, walked out the door, and left the keys, as instructed, under the mat. She didn't look back. She walked down the driveway, her body moving on autopilot, and pulled out her phone to call a taxi. The ride to Eleanor's was a blur of muted colour and sound. The city slid past the window, indifferent. The lottery letter was a warm, crinkling presence in her coat pocket. $54 million. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. She had all the power in the world, and she had just been thrown out of her home like a dog. Eleanor opened the door, her face etched with concern. "Liz? My God, what happened? I got your text. Come in, come in." Eleanor, a widow herself for 10 years, was all sharp angles and sharper wit, her loyalty a fortress. She didn't pry. She just led Elizabeth to the spare room, a cosy space that smelled of lavender and old books, and brought her a cup of chamomile tea. Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed, the porcelain warm in her trembling hands, and said nothing. For hours, she just sat. The shock was a heavy blanket, muffling the world. But as the afternoon sun slanted through the window and the tea grew cold, the blanket began to fray. The threads of humiliation, of betrayal, of pure incandescent rage started to poke through. She wasn't just a grieving widow. She wasn't a confused old woman. She was a multi-millionaire victim. The thought didn't bring comfort. It brought clarity. The shock receded completely, washed away by a tide of cold, hard fury. This wasn't just an eviction. This was a coup, a heist.
and they had underestimated her. They saw a frail old woman to be managed. They had no idea they had just created an enemy with 54 million reasons to fight back. A new purpose settled over her, heavy and solid as stone. It was no longer about survival. It was about understanding. It was about retribution. She needed to know why. Not just the greed for the house, but the depth of the rot that had allowed them to do this. The why was everything. In the quiet sanctuary of Eleanor's guest room, surrounded by the few boxes of personal items she'd been allowed to take, Elizabeth sought refuge in the familiar. She ran a hand over the worn leather spines of Richard's gardening almanacs. He'd had a complete collection going back 30 years. They were his Bible. She pulled one from the box, the 1998 edition, and opened it. The scent of old paper and dried ink was like a ghost of his presence. She flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing his neat, slanted handwriting. Notes in the margins, as always. Needs more acidic soil. Prune back hard after first frost. It was a soothing litany, a connection to a time before the world had cracked open. She smiled, remembering how he'd talked to his plants as if they were difficult children. Then, she noticed something else, something odd. On the page for Aconitum napellus, wolfsbane, there was a different kind of notation, almost hidden beneath a sketch of the flower's hooded blossom. It wasn't about soil or pruning. It read, TXN 915, K. She frowned. It looked like nonsense. She flipped forward. There, on the page for oleander, another beautiful poison, Scree 3.22-K, and again next to foxglove, INVT 1102-K. It was always a series of letters, a date, and then that single initial, K. Curiosity, sharp and insistent, cut through her grief. This wasn't Richard's usual meticulous gardening log. This was something else, a code. She pulled out another almanac, from 2005. The pattern was the same. Next to the entry for castor bean, a plant whose seeds could kill, was a note. DHCQ 6.10-F. The single letters changed. K, F, L. What did they mean? The other letters looked like stock ticker symbols. She'd learned a bit about the market from Richard over the years. On a whim, she pulled out her phone, its sleek screen a portal to a world Richard had never fully trusted. She typed stock ticker DHCQ into the search bar. The result was instant. Data Health Corp delisted, 2006. It had been a tech startup. David's tech startup. She remembered it vividly. The endless talk at Sunday dinners, the boasting about venture capital, the promises of a revolutionary new software. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She looked back at the notation. DHCQ 6.10 F, June 10th. She searched her memory, then typed a new query. Data Health Corp stock crash, 2005. The screen filled with old financial news articles. On June 10th, 2005, the company had suffered a catastrophic stock market loss after a disastrous product demo and rumours of internal mismanagement. It was the beginning of the end for David's company. And the letter next to it was F. For failure? For fall? A cold dread, mingled with a new, thrilling sense of discovery, washed over her. These weren't gardening almanacs. They were ledgers. Richard's secret ledgers. He had been tracking David's failures year after year, hiding the documentation in plain sight, nestled beside drawings of beautiful, poisonous plants. The symbolism was not lost on her. Wolfsbane, oleander, foxglove. Things that looked lovely, but carried death within them. A perfect metaphor for her son-in-law. She spent the rest of the night and all of the next day with the almanacs spread across the bed, a landscape of her hidden marital history. She cross-referenced every cryptic note with news archives and old market data on her phone. A story began to emerge, written in a code of stock tickers and coded judgments. TXN 915, K. K for collapse, she guessed. Next to the date, another of David's ventures had folded. SGY 322, K. K for kaput. It was a meticulous record of every bad investment, every failed startup, every financial disaster David had ever been involved in. But why? Why would Richard, a man who loathed confrontation, keep such a detailed, secret record of his son-in-law's ineptitude? It felt obsessive. It felt fearful, as if he wasn't just mocking him, but documenting something, building a case. The final piece of the immediate puzzle clicked into place when she found a note from just 2 years ago, beside an entry for the deadly nightshade plant. Loan. House lien. C. She didn't need to guess what C stood for. Chloe. Or perhaps coerced. She remembered David and Chloe asking for a large sum of money. Something about a can't-miss real estate opportunity. Richard had been quiet and withdrawn for weeks after. He'd told her they'd taken out a small second mortgage to help the kids. But this note implied something more sinister. A loan, tied to a lien, recorded next to a poison. Richard hadn't been helping his children. He'd been paying a ransom. Elizabeth sat back, the almanacs a damning testament around her. She had thought her husband's final years were marked by the quiet retreat of old age. Now she saw them for what they were. A silent, desperate battle against a predator in his own family. And Richard, in his own methodical, secretive way, had left her the ammunition. He had left her the map. The shrill, unfamiliar ringtone of a cheap burner phone sliced through the quiet of the room. Elizabeth jumped. She'd bought it at a corner store that afternoon, following a paranoid instinct she didn't know she possessed. She fumbled for it, her hands clumsy. An unknown number. She answered, her voice a nervous whisper. Hello? Grandma? The voice was young, hushed, and frantic. It's Leo. Relief washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy. Leo, oh my dear boy, are you all right? Where are you? I'm in my room. I had to use this phone. They check my real one, he whispered. There was a pause, and she could hear the anger and shame warring in his voice. Grandma, they're evil. What they did to you, what they're doing. I saw them celebrating after you left. They were laughing. The image sent a shard of ice through Elizabeth's heart. I know, Leo, I know. I want to help, he said, his voice firming with resolve. I'm not like them, I swear. I know you're not, my love. And in that moment, a new powerful alliance was forged,
across the fragile connection of a disposable phone. She had the map, he had the key. "Leo, I think I found something. In your grandfather's old almanacs. But I don't know what it all means. It's a code, I think, about your father's businesses." "A code?" Leo's interest was piqued. The sullen teenager was gone, replaced by a focused, intelligent young man. Tell me everything." For the next hour, Elizabeth relayed her discoveries. She read him the stock tickers, the dates, the cryptic single letters. He was silent for long stretches, and she could hear the frantic tapping of a keyboard in the background. "Okay, Grandma, I see the pattern," he said finally, his voice tight with excitement. He was tracking Dad's entire financial history, but it's more than that. Some of these dates, they don't line up with stock prices.
They line up with big wire transfers from Grandpa's accounts. I know because Dad used to make me help him with his accounting software when I was younger. He called it organising family finances. I think he was just too lazy to do it himself. Wire transfers? Elizabeth's blood ran cold. Yeah, big ones, always from Grandpa to Dad. After every single one of Dad's companies went belly up, Leo confirmed. It's blackmail, isn't it? Dad was blackmailing Grandpa. The word hung in the air between them, ugly and undeniable. I think so, Leo, but why? What could your father possibly have on Richard? There was another long pause. She heard a soft curse, then more typing. I have an idea, Leo said, his voice dropping lower, as if he was afraid of being overheard even through the secure phone. Dad has this old cloud storage account he hasn't used in years. A digital fortress, he used to call it. Corny, I know. He thinks he wiped it, but he's sloppy. He just deleted the shortcuts, not the source files. I still have the old login from when I had to sync his files for him. Maybe the answer is in there. Can you get in? Elizabeth asked, her heart pounding. I can try, but a lot of the files are encrypted. I'll need a password or a keyword to run the decryption software. Elizabeth looked at the almanacs spread around her, the poisonous plants, the coded notations. Leo, she said slowly, an idea taking shape. Richard was a gardener. He thought in terms of plants. What if the passwords are the names of the plants he wrote the notes next to? Like wolfsbane? Exactly. Or oleander. Or foxglove. Try them. Try all of them. She became his hands, his eyes, his memory. Over the next several days they worked in secret tandem. By day, Elizabeth would pore over the almanacs, finding new patterns, new keywords. At night, Leo, a digital ghost in his own home, would use them. He'd text her a file name, Project Nightingale or Westwood Proposal, and she would text back a single word, belladonna, hemlock, ricinus. One by one, the encrypted files cracked open. They were old email chains, scanned documents, deeds and partnership agreements. Together they pieced together a story far darker than simple blackmail over business failures. It began 25 years ago, a business venture between Richard and David's father, a man named Marcus Harland. They were buying up undervalued commercial properties in a rundown district, promising investors they would redevelop it into a bustling new commercial hub. But the emails revealed the truth. They were using dummy corporations and falsified environmental reports. It was an illegal real estate scheme designed to inflate the property values artificially before dumping them on unsuspecting secondary investors. It was fraud, plain and simple. Grandpa got cold feet, Leo murmured over the phone one night, his voice strained as he read from a newly decrypted email. He wanted out. He wrote to my grandfather, Marcus, saying it was morally bankrupt and he couldn't go through with it. What did Marcus say? Elizabeth whispered, clutching the phone. He threatened him. Said they were in too deep. If Richard backed out, he'd expose him and make sure he took the full fall. So Richard was trapped. He went along with it, a reluctant conspirator. The scheme worked. They made millions, money that was laundered and hidden. Then, years later, Marcus Harland was dying, and David, his son, found the emails. "Oh my God," Leo breathed. "It's all here. An email from Dad to Grandpa Richard. It's dated 10 years ago, right after Marcus died. Read it, Leo. Read it to me." Leo's voice was flat, hollow with shock as he read his father's words aloud. "Richard, I know what you and my father did. I have all the records, the Westwood deal, the falsified surveys, all of it. My father may be gone, but his debt to me is not. And now, it's your debt too. You're going to make things right. You're going to pay for my father's silence, and now you're going to pay for mine." Elizabeth closed her eyes. It wasn't just blackmail, it was generational extortion. David hadn't just discovered a secret, he had inherited a weapon. He had spent the last decade bleeding Richard dry, using the money to fund his and Chloe's shamelessly lavish lifestyle, to prop up his own pathetic, failing businesses, all while playing the part of the devoted son-in-law. Every failed startup, every bad investment, Richard had paid for it all, in silence and in shame. The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle slid into place not from a file, but from Elizabeth's own memory, sharpened by the awful clarity of the truth. She remembered a conversation from years ago, David drunkenly ranting at a family barbecue after another of his ventures had imploded. "It's not fair," he'd slurred, gesturing with a beer bottle. "My dad, he was brilliant, but he trusted the wrong people. He told me there was more. Real money, untraceable, the kind of money that can't be put in a bank." At the time, she'd dismissed it as drunken rambling. Now, it was a Rosetta Stone. The laundered money from the real estate scheme. "Leo," she said, her voice a dead calm, "the money from the fraud, where did it go?" "I don't know, Grandma. The trail goes cold after a series of shell corporations. It looks like it was converted into bearer bonds." Bearer bonds. Anonymous, untraceable, the financial equivalent of a ghost. "The house," Elizabeth whispered, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. "It's in the house. David thinks the bonds are hidden somewhere in the house." Suddenly, it all made sense. The obsession, the cruelty, the frantic urgency to get her out and sell the property. It wasn't just about the real estate value, which was considerable. It was a treasure hunt. He needed to tear the house apart, rip up the floorboards, look behind the walls. He couldn't do that with her living there. He wasn't just kicking out his inconvenient mother-in-law. He was trying to secure a criminal inheritance he felt was his birthright. Her mind flashed to Richard in his final months, pottering in the garden, his back stooped, his face a mask of quiet sorrow. He hadn't been fading away. He'd been holding a fortress. The house wasn't just a home, it was a vault, and he was its warden, protecting a treasure he couldn't spend and a secret he couldn't confess. The image solidified, giving way to a colder, more distant memory, a scene she hadn't witnessed but could now construct with chilling certainty. A flashback, not of her own life, but of David's. She pictured him as a younger man standing at the bedside of his dying father. Marcus Harland, a man she'd always found charming but predatory, would be gaunt and yellowed against the white hospital sheets, his voice a papery rasp. He would look at his son, his only child, not with love, but with a lifetime of bitter disappointment. "You're a failure, David.
the ghost of Marcus would hiss. You have my name, but none of my nerve. You play with your little tech companies, losing money like it's water. You don't know what real business is, what real wealth is. I tried, Dad, David's phantom would plead, desperate for a crumb of approval even at the very end. The ventures were sound, the market shifted. Excuses, Marcus would spit. You think the pittance I left you in the will is everything. That's for show. The real money. The real money is with Richard. He was weak, but he was smart enough to hide it. Millions. In a place no one would ever think to look. He owes you. He owes me. Don't you let that milksop gardener cheat you out of what is yours. It's your legacy. Go and take it. The memory, imagined but viscerally real, explained everything. David's entire adult life had not been a quest for his own success, but a desperate, pathetic attempt to claim his father's criminal legacy, to finally earn the approval of a dead man. The house on Harbourview Lane wasn't just a property to him. It was the final validation. It was the stage for him to finally prove his father wrong, to show him that he wasn't a failure, that he could be just as ruthless, just as cunning, and finally take what he believed was his. And she, Elizabeth, was the last lock on the door. The old leather-bound phone book on Eleanor's kitchen counter felt like an artifact from another time. Elizabeth ran a finger over the cracked spine, then flipped through the thin, almost transparent pages. A, B, V. Vance Arthur. The number was the same one he'd had for 30 years. She remembered Richard calling it late at night. The two of them talking in low, rumbling tones about law, about politics, about the slow, creeping decay of the world. Now she was the one making the call. Her hand trembled slightly as she dialed. It rang twice, then a voice, dry as autumn leaves but sharp as broken glass, answered. Vance? Arthur, it's Elizabeth. Elizabeth Miller. There was a pause, not of confusion, but of quiet calculation. Elizabeth, I was sorry to hear about Richard. A good man. The best. Thank you, Arthur. He always said the same of you. He was usually right. What's wrong? You don't sound like a woman calling to reminisce. She took a deep breath, the scent of Eleanor's baking bread filling the kitchen, a stark contrast to the acid in her throat. I'm in trouble, Arthur. The kind Richard said only you could handle. Is it about the house? He asked, his tone cutting straight to the point. Elizabeth froze. How did you know? I saw Chloe's performance at the funeral. I've been a trial lawyer for 50 years, Elizabeth. I know a rehearsal when I see one. And David has his father's eyes. Shifty. Always looking for an angle. So, they're trying to take the house. And put me in a home. Silver Pines Senior Living. The name tasted like poison. Of course, Arthur sighed. Pastel-coloured walls and a waiting room to die in. Let me guess, they produced a power of attorney you've never seen before. Signed 2 weeks before Richard passed. They say he wasn't in his right mind. He was sharper on his deathbed than those two have been in their entire lives, Arthur grunted. Okay. So they want the house. But something's changed. Your voice. It's not just scared, it's solid. What happened? I won the Powerball, Arthur. $54 million. The line went silent for a full 10 seconds.
Elizabeth could picture him perfectly, sitting in his dusty office, surrounded by towers of books, a half-empty glass of scotch on the desk, his sharp eyes staring at a fixed point on the wall. "Well, I'll be damned," he finally said, a low chuckle rumbling through the phone. "Richard always said you were the lucky one. This isn't about a house anymore, is it? This is about a war chest." "They know," Elizabeth said, her voice dropping. "David found the notification letter. Their attitude changed in a second, from getting rid of a burden to managing an asset. They won't let me back in the house. They say I'm confused, a danger to myself." "Of course they do," Arthur said, the humour gone, replaced by the cold steel she remembered. "They're going to file for an emergency conservatorship. They'll paint you as a doddering old fool who hit the jackpot and is about to be taken advantage of by con artists, when the only con artists are living under your roof. They'll find a psychiatrist for hire, someone who will sign any piece of paper for the right price, attesting to your dementia, your paranoia. They'll say they love you. They'll say their hearts are breaking. They will try to strip you of your name, your home, your autonomy, and your money in one single legal motion. And they will do it with tears in their eyes. A cold dread, colder than any she had felt before, washed over her. He had laid out their entire plan, a roadmap of cruelty she was just beginning to navigate. "What do we do? First, you do nothing. You are at Eleanor's. You stay there. You don't answer their calls. You don't respond to their texts. You don't see them. From this moment on, I am your shield, and I am your sword. Second, I'm taking your case, pro bono. Consider it a final favour for an old friend. Arthur, I can pay you. I know. That's why I'm not charging. It's much more satisfying this way. Now, I need you to have a courier bring me a copy of that lottery confirmation and any documentation you have from the commission. I'll handle the claim, put the winnings into a trust so airtight, God himself couldn't crack it. I'll be in touch. Stay strong, Elizabeth." "They've picked a fight with the wrong widow." "No way," he hung up. Elizabeth stood there, the receiver still pressed to her ear, the silence of the line buzzing with unspoken energy. Eleanor came in, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well?" "He called them a rehearsal," Elizabeth whispered, a faint grim smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks. "He said they were putting on a performance." "And now," Eleanor said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder, "it's time to plan the closing night." 3 days later, a crisp white envelope arrived by certified mail. It was not a letter from Chloe, it was a formal legal summons, just as Arthur had predicted. She sat at Eleanor's polished dining table and slid the thick vellum papers out. In the Superior Court of Maple Creek County, State of California, in the matter of the conservatorship of Elizabeth Miller, an elderly person. The words were stark, brutal. They stripped her of her own name, reducing her to a label, an elderly person. Attached was a sworn declaration from one Dr. Alistair Finch, a man she'd never met. She read his words, her hands shaking, with a rage so pure it felt like ice. The patient, Elizabeth Miller, exhibits classic symptoms of late-stage senile dementia, compounded by what appears to be a recent and severe onset of paranoia.
Her claims of her family's ill intent are textbook delusions, likely triggered by the trauma of her husband's passing. Her recent financial windfall, while fortunate, presents a clear and present danger. She lacks the cognitive capacity to manage such a sum and is highly susceptible to financial predators. It is my professional opinion that an immediate conservatorship, helmed by her loving and concerned children, Chloe and David Lasseter, is not only advisable, but medically necessary to protect Mrs. Miller from herself. Every word was a lie, a calculated, paid-for lie, designed to erase her. She saw David's smirking face behind the doctor's signature, heard Chloe's saccharine voice in the phrase loving and concerned children. The phone rang. It was Arthur. "You got it then?" "I got it," she said, her voice flat. "Good, now you feel the anger. Let it be your fuel. Their lawyer is a man named Sterling. He's slick. Wears $3,000 suits and a $10,000 smile. He specializes in these kinds of cases, making predators look like saints. He'll argue that Chloe and David are the real victims here, burdened with a mother who has tragically lost her grip on reality. "He's never met me," Elizabeth said. "He doesn't have to. He's not selling a person, he's selling a story. A sad, pathetic story. But our story will be better. It will be the truth. And the truth, Elizabeth, when wielded correctly, is the most vicious weapon of all. I've already filed our response. The hearing is set for Friday next week. Until then, you are a ghost. You don't exist. Let them talk to the empty air." That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. The words from the doctor's report echoed in her mind. Paranoid delusions, lacks cognitive capacity. She went into Eleanor's guest bathroom and stared at her reflection. She saw the lines around her eyes, the silver in her hair. She saw grief and exhaustion, but she did not see a madwoman. She saw a fighter, a woman who had been asleep for years, lulled by a comfortable life and a quiet love, who was now wide awake. And she was furious. The first attack didn't come through the mail or a lawyer's office. It came through the glowing screen of a phone. Leo called, his voice a strained whisper, as if he were a spy in his own home. "Grandma, are you sitting down?" "Leo, what is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine, but, Mum, she posted a video on Instagram, on TikTok. It's everywhere." Eleanor handed Elizabeth her own tablet, her fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar interface. Leo had sent a link. She tapped it, and her daughter's face filled the screen. Chloe was sitting in what was clearly Elizabeth's favourite armchair, the one by the window overlooking the garden. The lighting was soft, angelic. A single perfect tear traced a path down her expertly made-up cheek. She clutched a mug in her hands, her expression a mask of manufactured heartbreak. The caption read, "The hardest journey is watching someone you love fade away. Please send prayers for my mum. #dementia. #Alzheimer's awareness. #elder care. #family love. #heartbreak. #caregiver life." Then Chloe spoke. Her voice was a soft, trembling whisper. "Hi, everyone. I never thought I would be sharing something so personal. But I feel like I have to. For my mum. And for anyone else out there who is going through this. For years, we've watched my mum, our beautiful, vibrant mum, struggle. Little things at first. Forgetting keys,
names. We just thought it was, you know, a normal part of getting older. But after my dad passed, it's gotten so much worse. She took a shaky breath, dabbing her eye with the back of her hand, careful not to smudge her mascara. She's not the woman who raised me anymore. She's lost. She's so paranoid. She thinks we're trying to hurt her. Us, her own family. And now, this lottery thing. She let out a humorless, watery laugh. God, the lottery. It's supposed to be a blessing, right? But for her, it's just gasoline on the fire. She thinks everyone is after her money. She's talking to lawyers. She's hiding from us. We're just so scared she's going to be taken advantage of. Or that she's going to hurt herself. We're trying to step in to protect her, but she's fighting us every step of the way. It is the most painful thing I have ever had to do. Please, if you have a parent, hug them. Tell them you love them. Before they're not there anymore. Even when they're sitting right in front of you. The video ended. Below it, the comments poured in by the hundreds. Oh, Chloe, my heart breaks for you. Stay strong. You're doing the right thing. Sending so much love. Dementia is a cruel disease. Your mum is lucky to have you. This is so brave of you to share. You're a wonderful daughter. Elizabeth felt the blood drain from her face. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. She was no longer a person. She was a hashtag, a tragic storyline for Chloe's 500,000 followers. She had been erased and replaced by this caricature of a frail, demented old woman. The phone started ringing an hour later. Mary from the garden club. Elizabeth, dear, I just saw Chloe's post. Oh, you poor thing. Don't you worry. Let your children take care of everything. They love you so much. Then it was Susan from next door. Liz, I am so sorry. I had no idea you were going through this. David mentioned a while back you were getting a bit forgetful. If there's anything we can do... Each call was a small, sharp cut. They weren't calling her. They were calling the woman from Chloe's video. They spoke with a cloying pity that made her skin crawl. They had all picked a side, and it wasn't hers. The next blow came that evening. Leo sent another link, this time to the Maple Creek Community Forum on Facebook. The post was from a new anonymous profile named Concerned Neighbour. The writing style, the oily self-pity, it was pure David. Posting this anonymously for a friend who is going through a terrible time. Has anyone here had to deal with an aging parent who suddenly becomes combative and delusional after receiving a large sum of money? My friend and his wife are at their wits' end. Their mother is accusing them of the most awful things, all while they're just trying to protect her from scammers. They're trying to get legal help to manage her affairs, but she's fighting them, and it's tearing the family apart. Any advice on how to handle this with love and compassion would be appreciated. It's a tragic situation. The comments were a cesspool of neighborhood gossip and armchair psychology. Sounds like a classic case of sudden onset dementia. The money probably triggered a psychotic break. Your friends need to get power of attorney immediately, before she gives it all away to some Nigerian prince.
What a sad story, those poor children. I hope their mother gets the help she needs. Elizabeth closed the tablet. The four walls of Eleanor's guest room felt like they were closing in. She felt the sting of tears, hot and sharp. For a terrifying moment, she felt a sliver of doubt. Was she going crazy? Were they right? Had grief and shock somehow broken her mind? The campaign was brutally effective. It isolated her, shamed her, made her question her own reality. She was alone, a pariah in her own town, judged and condemned by people who had known her for decades.
She picked up the phone and dialed Arthur's number, her voice trembling when he answered.
Arthur, they're poisoning the well. Chloe, David, they've turned everyone against me. The whole town thinks I'm insane. They're so convincing. Arthur, am I wrong? Maybe I am confused. The silence on the other end was heavy. She expected him to offer legal reassurances, to talk about evidence and motions. Instead, his voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of 100 courtroom battles. Listen to me, Elizabeth. Right now, you are standing in the middle of a storm they created. It's loud. It's disorienting. The wind is howling with lies, and the rain is the false pity of your so-called friends. They want you to feel exactly what you are feeling right now. Small, alone, and crazy. This is a classic tactic. It's called public shaming. It has nothing to do with the law and everything to do with breaking your spirit before you even step foot in the courthouse.
Funny you.
He paused, letting his words sink in. Do not let them. Do you hear me? They are building a grand stage for their little tragedy. They are setting the lights, hanging the backdrop, selling tickets to the whole damn town. Let them. Let them build it as high and as wide as they want. His voice grew stronger, a current of steel running through it. Let them build the stage. You'll be the one to burn it down. Something inside Elizabeth shifted. The doubt, the fear. It didn't vanish, but it crystallized. It hardened from a suffocating fog into a cold, sharp diamond of resolve. He was right. This was a performance, and the final act hadn't been written yet. All right, Arthur, she said, her voice clear and steady now. What's our next move? Our next move is to wait, he replied. We let them play their hand, and you and I, we prepare for the truth. The night before the hearing was a crucible of rain and wind, the storm Arthur had spoken of made manifest. It lashed against the windows of Eleanor's house, each gust of wind sounding like a mournful sigh. Inside, at the dining room table, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. The scent of old paper and fresh coffee hung in the air. Richard's gardening almanacs were spread out before them, a lifetime of careful notations of seasons lived and lost. Elizabeth and Leo had been at it for hours, working their way backward through the years. They'd already uncovered the sordid tale of blackmail, the secret stock portfolio tied to poisonous plants. But something was still missing. The final piece. The almanac from the year Richard died lay open, its pages filled with his familiar, elegant script, which grew increasingly unsteady in the final months. We have to be missing something, Leo said, rubbing his tired eyes. He had been a rock, his quiet presence a balm on her frayed nerves. He pushed his laptop aside, the screen filled with spreadsheets decoding Richard's financial secrets, and focused on the book. He was more scared at the end. The codes were more frantic. What was he so afraid of? Elizabeth ran her finger over an entry from the last week of Richard's life. The handwriting was a barely legible scrawl. It wasn't a code. It was a confession, a terrified whisper committed to paper. She read it aloud, her voice soft in the quiet room. David knows. He found the old partnership files from the 70s. His father, my old shame. He says he'll tell Chloe everything.
about how her perfect father made his first seed money, a dirty real estate deal. It wasn't millions, but the lie is what matters.
My little girl, she could never look at me the same way.
He wants the bearer bonds, all of them. He cornered me in the study yesterday. His eyes, they weren't my son-in-law's eyes, they were a stranger's.
He said, "Give them to me, or I will destroy your memory for her."
God, what do I do? He's coming back tomorrow. The words hung in the air, heavy with a dead man's fear. It explained everything, Richard's anxiety, his weight loss, the haunted look in his eyes that she had mistaken for simple fatigue. He hadn't been failing. He had been fighting a silent war. The bastard, Leo breathed, his hands clenched into fists. He was torturing him. Elizabeth felt a fresh wave of grief, but it was quickly overtaken by a cold, clarifying rage. This wasn't just about money or a house. It was about cruelty. It was about a man tormenting a dying father-in-law for a payday. "There's more," she said, her eyes scanning the page. "The last entry he ever made." It was next to a drawing of a brugmansia, the angel's trumpet, a beautiful, deadly flower. But next to it there was no stock ticker, no date. There was a small, hastily drawn diagram, a simple, almost childlike sketch of the living room. It showed the fireplace, the mantelpiece, where her wedding photo had always sat. And directly above it, a small box, representing the smoke detector, was marked with a bold, firm X. Beside the diagram, Richard had written a single, powerful word: witness. They both stared at it. The rain beat against the glass. The clock on the mantel ticked, each second a hammer blow. "Witness," Elizabeth whispered. "What does it mean?" Leo's eyes went wide. The exhaustion fell away from him, replaced by a sudden electric energy. A witness. An eye. Oh my God. Grandma, it's not a normal smoke detector. It's a camera. A nanny cam. A smart device. He shot up from his chair, grabbing his laptop. He installed his own witness because he knew David was coming back. He was afraid David would do something drastic. His fingers flew across the keyboard, the clicking sound filling the room. They'd never know. Chloe and David, they're tech literate for social media, but they're not deep divers. They'd see a smoke detector and think nothing of it. It has to be motion activated, recording to a cloud server. If the account is still active, if they never found it and closed it. "What are you looking for?" Elizabeth asked, leaning over his shoulder, her heart pounding against her ribs. A brand name, a login page, anything. There were dozens of these disguised cameras on the market 5-6 years ago. Wise, Blink, Nest, he would have used his own credit card, his own email. They wouldn't have access to that. Leo's brow was furrowed in concentration. "I need a password hint, Grandma. Something only he would know. Think. A phrase, a name, a date. What was most important to him? The thing he would use to protect his biggest secret." Elizabeth closed her eyes, shutting out the storm, shutting out the room, and thought of Richard, his workshop, the smell of sawdust and oil, his passions, his boat, she said suddenly. He loved that old sailboat more than anything. The Sea Nymph. Leo typed it in. The Sea Nymph. A red, incorrect password message flashed on the screen. Damn it. Okay. A variation. Numbers? A special character? Elizabeth's mind raced. The boat, the joy it brought him, and the sorrow when he had to let it go. He sold it in 1988, she said, the memory sharp and clear, to pay for a down payment on the house. He always said it was the best and worst decision he ever made. He loved that house, but he mourned that boat for years. Leo's fingers paused over the keyboard. Sea Nymph 1988, he muttered. Typing it slowly, deliberately, he hit enter. For a moment, nothing happened. The screen just blinked. Elizabeth held her breath. And then the page refreshed. A simple blue and white interface appeared. A logo for a long-defunct company called Aegis Cloud Storage, and a file directory, folders neatly organized by date. "I'm in," Leo breathed, a triumphant shaky laugh escaping his lips. "You are right, Grandma, I'm in." Imisim Sesfangadu. His finger moved the cursor across the screen, scrolling backward through the months, past the day she'd been forced out, past the funeral, past the weeks of Richard's decline. He scrolled and scrolled until he reached a folder marked with a date she would never forget, the day her world had ended. He clicked on it. A series of video files appeared, labelled with timestamps. Motion clip 1432. Motion clip 1438. Motion clip 1501. Leo looked up at her, his young face pale in the glow of the screen, his eyes filled with a terrible, dawning knowledge. "Grandma," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Here it is, the day he died." The air in the courtroom was a recycled, sterile thing, tasting of old wood, cheap disinfectant, and palpable tension. It was the kind of air that held its breath, waiting for a verdict. Elizabeth sat beside her lawyer, Arthur Vance, her hands resting in her lap, a picture of unnerving calm. She felt a strange detachment, as if she were watching a play about her own life, a tragedy in 3 acts. And this was the final, devastating scene. Across the room, Chloe and David sat with their own counsel, a slick, self-assured man named Marcus Davis. He was currently on his feet, addressing the judge, his voice a smooth, persuasive baritone that slid over the facts like oil. "Your Honour," Davis began, his hands gesturing towards his clients, a portrait of filial concern. "What we have here is not a case of greed, as Mr. Vance would have you believe. It is a case of profound, heartbreaking love. A daughter and her husband, seeing the woman who gave them everything succumb to the cruel fog of time, are doing the only responsible thing, the only loving thing. They are seeking to protect her, to shield her from the complexities of a world that has become too much to bear." He paused, letting the words hang in the silent room. He looked at Elizabeth with a performance of pity that made her stomach clench. "Mrs. Sterling is a wonderful woman, a pillar of her family, but her recent, shall we say, erratic behaviour, her confusion following the tragic loss of her husband, and this sudden, overwhelming lottery windfall, it is a perfect storm for exploitation. My clients, Chloe and David Peterson, wish only to build a seawall against that storm. The Silver Pines Senior Living Facility is not a prison, it is a harbour. Selling the family home is not an act of theft. It is the funding of that safe harbour. It is what Richard Sterling himself would have wanted." Elizabeth felt Arthur's hand gently touch her arm, a silent command to remain still. She kept her gaze fixed on the judge, a woman with weary eyes who had seen too many family dramas play out in this very room. "We have submitted testimony from friends," Davis continued, his voice rising with conviction. "We have medical evaluations from respected geriatric specialists. We have the power of attorney signed by Richard Sterling himself, entrusting his son-in-law with these exact decisions in a time of crisis. The evidence is overwhelming. The responsible course of action is clear. Grant the conservatorship. Allow this family to heal.
Allow Elizabeth Sterling to live out her golden years in safety and peace, unburdened by decisions she is no longer equipped to make. He sat down. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with his practiced sincerity. The judge made a few notes, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Vance," she said, "your response." Arthur rose slowly. He was the opposite of Davies. Where Davies was slick, Arthur was solid, a man who seemed carved from oak. "Your Honour," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "Mr. Davies paints a touching picture of familial devotion. It is, however, a work of fiction." A low murmur went through the small gallery. Davies shot Arthur a venomous look. "The truth," Arthur continued, "is often less poetic, and in this case it is far, far uglier. I would like to call Miss Chloe Peterson to the stand." Chloe's face, a carefully constructed mask of sorrow, tightened for a fraction of a second before relaxing back into its role. She walked to the witness stand, her movements graceful, practiced. She was wearing a simple, dark-coloured dress, her hair pulled back, makeup minimal except for what was needed to make her eyes look larger, more tragic. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat down, folding her hands primly in her lap. "Miss Peterson," Arthur began gently, "you love your mother, don't you?" Chloe's lower lip trembled on cue. "More than anything," she whispered, her voice catching. "Everything I'm doing, it's for her." "Of course," Arthur said, his tone sympathetic. "And you believe she is confused, incapable of managing her own affairs?" It's not her fault," Chloe said, dabbing at a perfectly dry eye with a tissue she produced from her sleeve. Since he passed, she's not the same. She gets lost in conversation, she forgets things. And $54 million, Your Honour, that's an impossible amount of money for anyone, let alone for someone in her delicate state. People would take advantage of her. We just want to make sure she's safe." Her performance was flawless. She looked directly at the judge, her eyes pleading, a daughter's desperate appeal. Elizabeth watched her, the child she had raised, and felt a coldness so profound it was almost a physical pain. This was the stranger who had stolen her daughter's face. "So you feel the best course of action was to move her out of her home of 50 years and sell it?" Arthur asked. "The house is too much for her," Chloe insisted. "The memories, it's all just too painful. We thought a fresh start, a place with professional care, where she could be with people her own age. It was the kindest option. It's what Dad would have wanted. He worried about her being alone." "He worried," Arthur repeated softly. "And you were worried too, especially on the day he died. You must have been devastated when you found him." Chloe's face crumpled. This was her grand finale. I can't even talk about it," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "David found him. He called me. It was the worst day of my life." "Thank you, Miss Peterson, that's all," Arthur said. He let her sob for a moment longer, the sound echoing in the silent court, before she composed herself and returned to her seat, where David put a comforting arm around her. The performance had been A-list. The judge looked visibly moved. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, a hint of impatience in her voice, "do you have anything more substantive? So far you've only seemed to confirm the petitioner's claims." "I do, Your Honour," Arthur said calmly. "I would like to call Mr. David Peterson to the stand." David was even smoother than Chloe. He walked to the stand with an air of reluctant duty, his expression sombre. He was the rock, the responsible man forced into an unpleasant but necessary task. He took the oath. "Mr. Peterson," Arthur began, his tone conversational, Please, tell the court about the day Richard Sterling died. You were the one who found him, correct? David nodded, his jaw tight with manufactured grief. Yes, that's correct. I'd stopped by to check on him. Richard and I were very close. I was supposed to fix a leaky faucet under the sink for him. I let myself in, called his name. No answer. I went into the living room and he was there, on the sofa. I knew right away he was gone. What did you do then? Arthur asked, his eyes never leaving David's face. I checked for a pulse, of course, David said, his voice steady, rehearsed. There was nothing. I was in shock. I called 911 immediately.
Then I called Chloe. It was hell.
A terrible tragedy, Arthur murmured.
You must have been heartbroken to find your father-in-law, a man you were close to, in such a state, and to know there was nothing you could do.
There was nothing anyone could do, David said firmly. The paramedics confirmed it. A massive coronary. It was instantaneous. He didn't suffer. I see, Arthur said. He walked back to his table and picked up a small remote control. Mr. Peterson, you paint a very clear picture. A man, stopping by to help his father-in-law, discovers a tragedy and does everything he can. It's a sad story, but pictures, Mr. Peterson, can sometimes be incomplete. He turned to the judge. Your Honour, with the court's permission, I would like to present a piece of evidence, a short video. It provides a more comprehensive view of the events of that afternoon. Davis shot to his feet. Objection, what is this? We've received no discovery about a video.
It's rebuttal evidence, counsel, Arthur replied smoothly. Offered to impeach the witness's testimony. It was only recently uncovered, and its origins are unique. He glanced toward the back of the courtroom. Elizabeth followed his gaze. Leo was sitting in the last row, his face pale, his knuckles white where he gripped his phone. He looked at Elizabeth, then at Arthur, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I'll allow it, the judge said, her curiosity piqued. Proceed, Mr. Vance. Arthur nodded to Leo, who pressed something on his phone. The large monitors on either side of the courtroom, which had been displaying case numbers, flickered and then came to life. The image was high definition, shot from a high angle, looking down on a familiar living room. Elizabeth's living room. The perspective was odd, slightly distorted, the view from the ceiling. The view from the smoke detector. David on the stand froze, the colour drained from his face.
Chloe stared at the screen, her mouth slightly agape. Confusion warring with a dawning horror. On the screen, Richard Sterling walked into the frame. He looked tired, but he was alive. He sat down heavily on the sofa, clutching his chest. His face was contorted in pain. He gasped, his hand flailing toward the coffee table, toward the small brown bottle of nitroglycerin pills, sitting next to a stack of magazines. He knocked the bottle but couldn't grip it. He slumped back against the cushions, his breath coming in ragged, desperate heaves. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. It was silent, raw, and utterly horrifying to watch. Then the living room door opened. David Peterson walked in. He was in the same clothes he'd described wearing. He stopped. He looked at the sofa. He saw Richard, alive, dying, his eyes pleading. There was no shock on David's face, no panic. There was only observation, calculation. He walked calmly to the coffee table. He looked down at Richard, who was now barely moving, his hand feebly twitching. David reached down and picked up the small bottle of nitroglycerin pills. He didn't try to give one to Richard. He didn't call for help. He looked at the bottle in his hand, then calmly, deliberately, slipped it into his trouser pocket. He turned.
gave one last dispassionate look at the dying man on the sofa, and walked out of the room, pulling the door almost closed behind him. The courtroom was utterly, deathly silent. No one breathed. The only sound was the faint hum of the courthouse ventilation system. A moment passed on the screen. The door creaked open again. Chloe peered in. She saw her father. She saw him give one final shuddering gasp. Her eyes widened. For a single, eternal second, she hesitated. A flicker of something. Fear, shock, humanity crossed her face. Then it was gone, replaced by a cold, reptilian stillness. She slowly, silently backed away, pulling the door fully shut, sealing the room,
sealing her father's fate. The video feed ended. The screens went black. The silence in the courtroom broke. It wasn't a shout. It was a sound. A single, unified exhalation of pure horror from everyone present. The jury stared aghast. Davies, the slick lawyer, looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his mouth hanging open, his face ashen. And then Chloe let out a sound. It wasn't a sob or a cry. It was a strangled, guttural scream of a trapped animal, a sound of pure, undiluted guilt and terror. Chaos erupted. The judge began banging her gavel, a futile, rhythmic thud against the tidal wave of shock and revulsion that swept through the room. "Order! Order! I will have order in this court!" Her voice boomed, but it was lost in the noise. People were on their feet, shouting, pointing. The jurors were looking at David and Chloe with expressions of utter disgust. Before anyone else could react, two plainclothes detectives, who had been sitting quietly in the gallery, were suddenly on their feet and moving with purpose. They had been tipped off by Arthur. They were ready. One moved towards the witness stand, where David sat utterly frozen, a statue of guilt. The other intercepted Chloe as she tried to scramble away from the table, her screams now devolving into hysterical sobs. "David Peterson," the first detective said, his voice calm but unyielding as he snapped handcuffs onto David's wrists. "You're under arrest for suspicion of murder." "No, wait, it's not, you don't understand," David stammered, the smooth facade completely shattered, revealing the panicked, snivelling creature beneath. "Chloe Peterson," the second detective said, taking a blubbering Chloe firmly by the arm. "You have the right to remain silent." "He was already dying," she shrieked, her words a desperate, nonsensical torrent. "I didn't do anything. I just closed the door. I was scared. I just closed the door." Her confession, blurted out in pure panic, echoed through the courtroom. Davies slumped into his chair, dropping his head into his hands. His case, his career, and his clients' lives, incinerated in a matter of seconds. Elizabeth watched it all unfold, the noise and the motion swirling around her. She felt Arthur's hand on her shoulder, a steadying presence. She looked at her daughter being led away in handcuffs, a shrieking, unravelling mess. She looked at the man who had called her husband a friend, his face a mask of disbelief as he was escorted out of the court. She felt no triumph, no joy, only a vast, hollow emptiness. The battle was over. She had won. But the price was the complete and utter destruction of her family. A single tear, hot and heavy, finally traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of grief for them, but a tear for the family that had once been, the memories that were now forever tainted, the love that had curdled into something monstrous.
In the back of the room, Leo watched them go, his face grim. He lowered his phone. On the screen, the social media app X was already exploding. Chloe's name was the #1 trending topic in the country. #Peterson trial. #justice for Richard. #door of death. Screenshots from the court video, grainy but unmistakable, were already spreading like wildfire. A post from a local news reporter in the courtroom had tens of thousands of retweets in minutes. Unbelievable scene in conservatorship hearing. Video evidence appears to show Chloe and David Peterson allowing father-in-law Richard Sterling to die, both taken into custody. He scrolled through the comments under Chloe's last Instagram post, a black and white photo of her and Richard, with a caption about how much she missed his wisdom. The comments from just an hour ago were all hearts and prayers. Now,
they were a deluge of fury and hatred. "Monster, you let him die? I hope you rot in prison. Cancelling all my brand sponsorships with you, you are disgusting." Her meticulously crafted world, her empire built on fake smiles and filtered authenticity, was being annihilated in a global firestorm. There was no coming back from this. The truth, once revealed, was a ravenous, unstoppable thing. A few days later, in the quiet, wood-panelled office of a downtown law firm, another, smaller drama played out. The initial charges of fraud and forgery had been immediately upgraded. The district attorney, smelling a high-profile, slam-dunk case, had charged them with second-degree murder and conspiracy. The lawyer, a kindly man with silver hair, cleared his throat. "As per the last will and testament of Richard Sterling," he began, looking at Leo, who sat opposite him with Elizabeth by his side. "The house, its contents, and all primary bank accounts are bequeathed to his wife, Elizabeth Sterling." He paused, then picked up a separate envelope. "However, there is a codicil regarding a specific asset, a safe deposit box, number 713 at the downtown branch of Merchants National Bank." He slid a key across the polished desk. "Richard rented this box 5 years ago. The will is explicit. Only one person was ever to be given this key and access to this box in the event of his death. You, Leo." Leo stared at the key. It felt heavy, impossibly so. Later that day, they stood in the cold, sterile vault of the bank. The attendant used her key, then Leo used his. The long metal box slid out with a heavy metallic sigh. Leo lifted the lid. It wasn't filled with cash. It was filled with neat stacks of bearer bonds, vintage official documents, each worth a significant sum. Tucked on top was a single, folded piece of paper. Leo's hands trembled as he opened it. It was his grandfather's familiar, spidery handwriting. "Leo," it read. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the worst has happened. This is not your burden, but your shield. It is the result of a mistake I made long ago, a foolish partnership with David's father. David found out and used it to bleed me dry for years. He believes this is hidden in the house. He will tear the place apart for it. He thinks it is his inheritance. He is wrong. It is my penance, and now it is your future. Use it well. Build something good. Be a better man than he is, and a better man than I was. I love you, Grandpa." Leo sank onto a nearby bench, the bonds and the note in his hands. It wasn't treasure, it was a confession, a warning, and a final desperate act of love and protection. The weight of it all, the years of his grandfather's secret torment, the sheer evil of what David and Chloe had done, finally crashed down on him. Elizabeth sat beside him, wrapping an arm around her grandson, and in the cold, silent vault, surrounded by the ghosts of old sins, they held on to each other. The town's gossip had fallen silent, stunned by the sheer cinematic horror of the truth. The family was a ruin, a crater left behind by an explosion of greed and neglect. And in the center of it all, Elizabeth and Leo were the only survivors. 6 months passed. Not like the turning of a calendar page, but like the slow, deliberate healing of a deep wound. The seasons changed. The world kept spinning. The media frenzy died down, replaced by the next scandal, the next tragedy. David and Chloe were convicted, their appeals exhausted, their faces now just another pair of mugshots in the digital ether. Elizabeth was home. The house on the cliff no longer felt like a fortress under siege, nor a prison of memories. It was quiet now. A deep, settled quiet that was no longer lonely. It was simply peace. The lottery money, managed by a shrewd, compassionate team Arthur had helped her assemble, was a silent foundation beneath her feet, not a source of chaos, but of security. She had won. She had her house, her freedom, her future. But the victory was hollowed out by loss, its taste a strange mix of bitter ash and clean, salt-tinged air. She found her solace not in courtrooms or lawyers' offices, but in the soil. On a bright, cool autumn afternoon, she was on her knees in the garden Richard had loved so much. Her hands, wrinkled but strong, were covered in dark, rich earth. For years, she had only watched him work the garden. Now it was hers. She wasn't just tending his old plants, she was planting new life, hardy perennials that could weather any storm, and fragile, beautiful annuals that lived for a single, brilliant season. It was an act of faith, a declaration that life, however battered, goes on. The crunch of gravel on the path made her look up. Leo was walking towards her, not with the haunted look of the boy in the courtroom, but with a gentle calm that sat easily on him. He was taller, his shoulders broader. He was becoming a man. In his hands, he carried 2 steaming mugs of tea. He didn't say a word, just handed one to her, and sat down on the low stone wall that bordered the flower bed. They sat in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the ocean, painting the sky in strokes of orange and violet. "I passed my midterms," Leo said finally, his voice quiet. He was studying computer science at the local university, funded by Richard's legacy. "I knew you would," Elizabeth said, taking a sip of tea. It was warm and sweet. "I'm working on a new app," he said, pulling out his phone. He didn't show her news articles or social media feeds. He showed her a beta interface for a program that could identify plants and flowers from a single photograph. "I thought it could be useful for the garden." "It's wonderful, Leo," she said, and her smile was genuine, unburdened. They didn't talk about the trial. They didn't talk about Chloe or David. They didn't talk about the past. Their ghosts had been laid to rest, not forgotten, but accepted. To speak of them now would be to give them power over this peaceful afternoon. Instead, they talked about the future. They talked about whether the new roses would take root before the first frost. They talked about the university, about his plans, about the simple, ordinary things that make up a life. As the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, casting the garden in a soft purple twilight,
Elizabeth looked at the freshly turned earth, at the small green shoots pushing their way towards the sky. The house behind her was no longer a prize to be fought over. It was simply a home. And in the dark, rich soil at her feet, new seeds were taking root, waiting for the spring. It was a quiet ending, but it was a beginning too. What we learn from Elizabeth's story isn't just about the darkness of betrayal, but about the incredible strength we can find within ourselves when all seems lost. It's a reminder that our worth isn't defined by our age or by what others think we are capable of. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is plant a new garden in the ruins of the old one. Have you ever faced a moment that forced you to rediscover your own strength? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience could be the seed of hope for someone else. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice.